When you think about the best cars that ever came out of Japan in the 90s, you think about the Skyline, Sylvias, RX-7s, NSX, and of course, the Mark IV Supra. All of these cars are legendary in their own way, for being far ahead of the time in technology, or being the ultimate driving machine, letting the driver control and feel the car at the same time. It feels like any sports car coming out of Japan at that time was ahead of its time, and there's no better car that describes what Japanese sports cars were like in that era than the Supra. From the first car to have new technology, to creating one of the most tunable platforms ever, along with having one of the most famous cult followings and the reputation of being a supercar killer, appearing in countless movies such as Fast and Furious and Initial D. But how did we get the monster of the Mark IV Supra? The Toyota Supra started in 1978. It was built to be a competitor to the Datsun Z. However, the name Supra had not been given to the car yet, and the car was called the Toyota Celica XX. And the car was only sold in Japan at this time. But a year later, the Celica XX started to sell in the United States as the Celica Supra. But the car was not as fast as the Datsun Z, its main competitor. At this point, Supra was very luxurious and longer than the other Celicas, which forced the price tag on these to be much higher. But in 1982, the Supra A60 came to the market, which is often referred to as the second generation of the Supra, even though the Supra was still named the Celica Supra. The Supra was produced until 1986 and was being constantly upgraded during its production. And at the end of its production, it had an output of 160 horsepower. At this point, there was a more luxurious type with an automatic transmission that was labeled as the L type. Toyota also made a P type, which is more performance oriented and had a manual transmission with a more understated interior. Finally, in 1986, with the A90 Supra, Toyota made the first Supra model and separated the Supra name from the Celica. At the time, the car produced 200 horsepower, but in 1987, a turbocharged version was produced that bumped the number up to 230 horsepower. The Mark IV Supra had Toyota's famous Toyota electric modulated suspension. They made the car more maneuverable, and Toyota kept upgrading the Mark IV Supra until 1992. And now for the most iconic Supra, the car deserves its own part in the video. And probably this video would have never been made if the Toyota Supra wasn't so insane. The A80 or Mark IV Supra took 4 years for Toyota to fully design, because the Mark IV Supra was the first ever Supra that was really a sports car and was more than just a performance-oriented luxury car, more than any previous Supra. One of the reasons that the car was so iconic is that Supra has the iconic 2JZ engine. The naturally aspirated Supra made 220 horsepower, but later the twin turbo setup made into production made 276 horsepower, even though that was a lie and the Supra was probably making around 300, because all Japanese car brands were lying about how much their cars were making, because the manufacturers were limited to making their cars under 276 horsepower. But most sports cars coming out of Japan at that time were making more than that. The Toyota Supra was also a very easily tunable car. Even with it starting around 300 horsepower, coming from the 2JZ, that engine could quickly be upgraded, giving the Supra over 1,000 horsepower, giving it the reputation of being a supercar killer, being able to beat any car with 10 times the value of the Supra. No car at the time was more easily modified, and any trained mechanic could get more out of Supra than any other car, which is exactly what Smokey Nagato did. He put a V12 in a Supra and reached 222 miles per hour. This, along with appearances in famous movies such as the Fast and Furious, cemented the Supra's name as a household name. For nearly 20 years, the idea of a new Supra being made by Toyota was just crazy. But finally, in 2019, the A90 Supra, or the Supra GR, was released. The A90 Supra got some serious backlash. Some people said it wasn't fast enough, and some people said it was too expensive. But the major problem that many people said is that the Subaru had a BMW engine. The critics believed the Silk Road cooperation between the BMW and Toyota used the BMW engine that disrespected the Supra badge. But some key things people don't understand about the Supra. For one, it wasn't purely a BMW engine. In fact, it was a collaboration between the two to create a new engine and chassis. They worked both for a convertible and a hardtop, or on the Supra in Z4 M108. The engine was based off a previous BMW engine, but Toyota added their own technology to make the car and engine more reliable and durable. I do see where many of the critics come from, that Toyota didn't use a Toyota or even Japanese motor, but they also need to understand that Toyota hadn't made a performance engine in almost 20 years, and Toyota will sadly never make a gas-powered engine for sports cars ever again probably, because they've invested so much in hybrid, hydrogen, and EV technology for cars to race. And this is the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed and learned some things about the Supra. Please consider subscribing and leaving a like if you enjoyed the video.